Hi everyone, my name is Emma Stuhl. I work for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. I work in waste reduction and waste management, and I'm very excited to be here connecting with your program today because I feel like you folks are ambassadors out in your communities who are helping folks understand what they need to do, but also how to do that. So I'm just very excited to get on the same page as you folks and to hear your questions. I want to just start off with a little bit of context, which is that Vermont has a handful of rules about what we cannot put in our trash, what can't go to the landfill. And these rules were inspired by a variety of different reasons for different materials, but one reason that is true for all of them is that we produce a lot of trash in Vermont, and we produce a lot of trash in our country. In Vermont, last year we produced about 4 pounds of trash per person per day, and that added up to over 400,000 tons of trash in the year. So it really is a mountain of trash. And we spend a lot as a state, both in money and time and energy, managing this trash and making sure it doesn't become a public health hazard or a nuisance or harm wildlife. We do our best to make sure it doesn't harm wildlife. So this is a big topic, even though individually it feels like maybe we don't have that much of an impact altogether. It's an important topic. And I couldn't actually bring you all to the landfill with me today, so I figured I'd show just at least one snapshot from the landfill. This is from the Coventry landfill in Coventry, Vermont. It's our only landfill, and a lot of our trash in the state goes here. And this is a picture from a couple years ago where they were building a new cell. And you can see it's really quite the process, and our modern landfills are highly engineered and have a lot of double safety checks. And so this is just giving a demonstration of what a big investment it is to manage these mountains of trash, or hills, really more like hills of trash, and that these cells maybe are filling up quicker than we would like. So of those laws, today we're really focusing on the universal recycling law because that is the focus of our webinar and relates directly to residents and landlords. And this universal recycling law was inspired by the amount of trash we produce in Vermont, but also what's actually in our trash. And this pie chart is a picture from a study of what's actually in Vermont's trash. A couple years ago, we study this every 5 years, and our consultant goes out and samples trash all over the state, which is a challenging job, I imagine, so I'm very grateful for their work. And what you can see here is that almost half of what's in our trash could have been recycled or composted. And just to clarify, the organics here is not referring to organic food or organic agriculture. This organics is talking about anything that was once alive or was part of something that was once alive that will decompose. It's an organic substance that's carbon-based and will turn into organic matter. So almost half of our trash could have been recycled or composted. And so the universal recycling law was passed, and it does many things, but one of the things that it did was it banned most of our common household recyclables from the landfill. So it banned plastics, number 1 and 2, glass jars and bottles, aluminum and steel cans, clean aluminum foil and pie plates, and then cardboard and mixed paper. And that was in 2015. So hopefully everyone in Vermont is recycling, knows how to recycle, and knows that it's been required for a while. And then another piece of the universal recycling law is that it banned clean wood and leaf and yard debris from the trash in 2016. So this is our organics category. And it has been slowly phasing out food scrap bans. So what that means is that a handful of years ago, it required the largest producers of food scraps, like the universities and the big hospitals and some food manufacturers, to start separating their food scraps to have them not go in the trash. And it's been rolling down to smaller and smaller producers. And starting this summer, July 1st, 2020, food scraps are banned from the landfill, banned from the trash for everyone in Vermont, including you and me and residents and businesses, landlords, for all of us. And this is going to be the focus of most of our webinar because it's a change. So we want to make sure you folks are equipped with knowledge for this change for some people. And this food scraps piece was inspired by many other good reasons. There's a lot of great reasons to keep food scraps and wasted food out of the landfill. We'll start by celebrating one of the great benefits of this law is that it turns out there was a lot of really quality edible food going in the trash and going to the landfill before. And when supermarkets started having to separate their food scraps from the trash, many of them, seeing what they were separating, started donating that food to the food bank instead. And in 3 years, those donations of rescued food, so food that had been going to the trash but was rescued from the trash, those donations almost tripled in 3 years. So that's really exciting because that is food that we want people to eat. Another thing that many people might not know is that when organics, like food scraps or leaf and yard debris, end up in the landfill, they hardly rot at all. There's some great pictures of a scientist who dug up an old landfill and pulled out an orange carrot that looked great. Looked like you could peel it and put it in a soup. I don't think they did, but so these organics and these food scraps hardly rot at all, but the tiny bit of rotting that does happen produces methane, which is a really strong greenhouse gas that scientists are estimating is up to 84 times more warming than carbon dioxide within a 20-year period. So the summary of that is that we really don't want to produce methane. And so that's a really great reason to keep those materials out of the landfill. Because if those materials are instead fed to people because they're perfectly good food, or fed to animals because they're good enough for animals but not good enough for people, or composted, methane is not produced in those processes. And then all this great work to donate food and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to compost soil is supporting our green economy in Vermont. And I have seen with my own eyes just in the past handful of years, new businesses appear in this sector and existing businesses expand. So that's really exciting. And then I'm guessing we probably have some gardeners on this webinar who know already how awesome compost is. But for everyone else, finished compost is a really incredible soil amendment that can actually restore soils. Finished compost helps soils hold more water, makes for healthier plants and healthier soil ecosystems of everything that's living in there, reduces erosion, and much more. Compost is really just an incredible substance. So we want those food scraps to make this amazing compost that can be spread anywhere in Vermont, whether it's a lawn or a garden or the woods, anywhere it lands, it is good. And then we already talked about the benefit of just keeping stuff out of the landfill, thinking about our landfill space as precious space for the things that have to go in there. Oh, and then just to share a little more on the greenhouse gas piece, we took our estimate of how many food scraps are going in the trash each year, over 70,000 tons, and we plugged that number into an EPA calculator, and it told us that if we composted those scraps instead of trashing them, that would reduce our state's greenhouse gas emissions as much as not driving around the earth 4.6 thousand times. So that's pretty mind-boggling and very exciting, I think, because it really shows a really positive piece of our cumulative our ability to collectively really do good in this space and to really have a positive impact through composting our materials. So you're probably wondering, okay, great context, but what do landlords need to do? How does this relate to my world? And the Rental Housing Health Code, as you may be familiar, requires landlords to maintain sanitary conditions for trash, recyclables, and food scraps in accordance with the Universal Recycling Law. So up until this July, what that has meant for a couple years is that they need to maintain sanitary conditions for trash and recyclables. And starting this July, food scraps are added into that section because the Universal Recycling Law is banning them from the trash. And the code goes a little more specific. It says that the owner or landlord or property manager shall provide and maintain appropriate receptacles, assure arrangements are made for removal not less than once a week, and that outside bins must be durable, cleanable, and watertight with properly fitting covers. And so I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on recycling and then talk more about food scraps. And what I really want to do is, since you now know the requirements, I want to just give you some of the tips and some of the context that my team has so that you can help your community and you're informed to do that. So one thing that's useful to know for recycling is that trash haulers have to offer trash and recycling as one bundled service for any residential setting. So even if it's a large apartment complex and the trash hauler is thinking of the apartment complex as a commercial account because it's so big, it's still a residence. People are living there, and so they need to offer that service as one bundled fee. So if that's ever not happening and you get stuck, you can feel free to be in touch with our program, and we're happy to give the hauler a call and remind them of that. In my experience, this is happening throughout Vermont. This has been true for years. It doesn't come up very often, but every once in a while. And another thing that's good to know about recycling, which hopefully you've heard a little bit about through some channel or another, is that it's important for us all to try and recycle better, recycle as well as we can, because when stuff that doesn't belong in the recycling goes to the recycling sorting center, sometimes it's actually dangerous to have it there. And even if it's not dangerous, they have to pull it out, which takes time, which makes the system cost more. And if they miss it, they don't pull it out, it's going to get mixed in with all the good stuff and make it just a lower quality product, because the recycling actually is going to go get made into something else. So to help us all throughout Vermont recycle as well as we can, we really encourage landlords to, and really anyone who's in a position to do this, to share information about what's recyclable in a place and what's not recyclable and what the requirements are, and then specifically how your system works. And all of these handouts and more are on our website, except for the plastic bags one. But as I'm saying that now, I'll make sure to send that to Meg, and maybe we'll put that up on the website so it's available for people. So landlords can post these on their bins or in the trash room if they have that. Landlords could email them to their residents or put them in people's mailboxes so they can put it on their fridge. And some of the local solid waste districts also provide information specific to their area and are happy to give landlords resources to distribute to their tenants. And in Chittenden County, landlords are actually required to educate residents when they move in, and then at least once a year. And then in the rest of the state, we just encourage it because it's useful. And if somebody's wondering, we want them to get the right information. We also on our website have signs and different symbols that folks can print out, even beyond putting things in people's mailboxes, just really clearly labeling the actual containers is a key piece of team successful recycling? I feel like usually haulers or whoever is working with bins have pretty good labels, but sometimes it's confusing. So you want to clarify for folks. And then this does not always work, but sometimes it does. So it's worth mentioning, especially in settings that are multi-unit rental situations. It can be really helpful to find a champion. There's often a resident, whether an adult or a kid, who really cares about recycling, who really cares about composting, and may even be really knowledgeable, who can give the landlord feedback of like, oh, we need our recycling picked up more often, or we need another bin, it's filling too fast. Or the landlord can ask, are we using all the space in our trash dumpster? And if they're not, maybe they could switch to a smaller dumpster and save some money there that they can use for food scraps. Or the champion might be willing to help with education, to provide feedback to the other residents of like, oh, reminder everybody, this doesn't go in the recycling. So yeah, it's great to take advantage of other people's enthusiasm. It helps make the whole system work. So that's recycling. I guess one thing I should say on recycling is that landlords need to provide that container, but they don't have to hire a hauler to pick it up. Some folks may bring the trash and recycling to a drop-off, like at a transfer station. And so with food scraps, you or landlords or anyone have those two options also, to hire pickup or to provide containers and bring them to a drop-off. But with food scraps, there is also sometimes the option of composting scraps on site. And I'll talk about each of these in more detail. So if someone wants to hire a pickup, there's two ways to get started. So one is to go to vtrecycles.com, and we maintain a list of Vermont's food scrap haulers. And another way is to do some local networking, to ask your local solid waste district, or ask around in your community or through Front Porch Forum and see just what other folks in your area are using and how that's working for them. Most haulers either operate at one of these scales or the other. Maybe some of them do both. So they might provide a rolling cart similar to a trash or recycling cart that collects food scraps and that they pick up. And some haulers leave a clean cart each week. Some haulers, that's the customer's responsibility to clean it. In a couple parts of Vermont, the composters allow the haulers to use one specific brand of certified compostable bags, so that helps with cleaning it. It just depends on the hauler and where in Vermont folks are based. And then some haulers work at a smaller scale, where each unit, basically each household, gets a small bucket that they fill with food scraps, and the hauler collects that. So depending where you live, you may only have access to a larger pickup. The smaller scale pickups are more common in denser parts of the state, but in my experience, just the service options are expanding rapidly, so it's great to check back in on that Vermont hauler list. And I'll tell you later on how folks can get help and get more information and get current info. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and this, similar to the champions, doesn't work for everybody, but it does work sometimes, so I like to mention it. So if all the food scraps were going in the trash before, sometimes when people take those food scraps out of the trash, this is true for recycling too, but hopefully everybody's already been taking their recyclables out of the trash. So when those materials get taken out of the trash, sometimes people or businesses have found that they can switch to a smaller size dumpster and save some money through that. And then they can, in their own internal budgeting, think about moving that money to the food scrap pickup instead of just adding food scrap pickup on. If you live in Bear Country, we have this great resource that we put together with the Fish and Wildlife Department about strategies to just make sure your food scrap totes are not gonna attract bears. And these tips really also apply to garbage and also apply to pet food, or just keep your pet food inside. They're sort of generally useful, but this is a great resource that we'll make sure we send out. And as I mentioned before, it can be great to ask around locally or to ask your local waste district what haulers are in your area. The same is true for drop-offs. So every transfer station in Vermont and every fast trash or bag drop needs to offer food scrap collection service. What they offer, similar to the haulers, what they offer varies. At some places there's no fee or a really nominal fee because they're subsidizing the cost of that with trash fees to motivate people to do it, because people need to do it and to make it affordable for folks. But at other places they're charging based on some other system. So you can start by asking your transfer station, or you can ask your local waste district, which I'll tell you about later. You also can type Vermont Materials Management map into a web search engine, and we have this map that you can zoom in to your area and it'll show you where there are transfer stations and certified compost sites. And many of those compost sites also accept food scraps from residents. So if you click on the little icon, it'll give you the phone number and you can call and learn more. There are some farm-based drop-offs and some more local sites that are not on this map, and fast trashes that are at a recycling center are on this map, but if they just come into an empty parking lot and then take everything away, they're not on here. So that's why the local information is helpful. So that brings us to composting on site. At the small scale, composting on site can be a really great option and can be pretty easy and simple. That said, it does require some commitment and it does require some time and some work. And so folks should know that, and if they're deciding to compost on site, they need to make sure that there's somebody that's committed to keep an eye on things and mix it a little bit and make sure that it doesn't become an issue, which it hopefully will not, but you just need somebody paying attention to it. If folks are interested in learning how to compost in a backyard or a side yard, we have this great guide called the Dirt on Compost. That's a great introduction to composting in the backyard. And then I really recommend, when possible, that folks take a class. I think it's great to have a chance also to ask questions and get more tips. And a lot of the local waste districts and alliances teach free home composting workshops. And the UVM extension offers, in partnership with us every year, offers the Vermont Master Composter class, which is online and more in depth usually than a 1 hour swimmy workshop. It's a multi-week course, or sorry, 1 hour district workshop. The Master Composter class is a multi-week course. And then I also recommend just asking around, finding somebody in your network who already composts and who might even be really excited to help you figure out how you're going to compost or get set up to compost. For all the reasons that I mentioned before, there's a lot of people who are really excited about compost, whether they're gardeners or whether they just really care about climate change, or whether it just feels really easy to them because they've done it for 40 years and it's no big deal. So finding a coach can be a great way to make it feel simple and doable. Similar to the totes, though, we do need to be extra intentional about composting on site in bear country. And we worked with the Fish and Wildlife Department. We have a handful of suggestions that are our preventative steps to take to help make sure that there isn't an issue, or to set folks up for success to not have an issue, because we really don't want to feed bears or draw them into neighborhoods. And that said, Fish and Wildlife has told us that bears are not usually drawn into neighborhoods because of compost piles. It's often birdseed or chickens or pet food or something else. But if a bear stumbles across an open compost pile while they're exploring for other things, they might become curious, or they might eat food. And we really don't want them to have a positive experience in anyone's backyard. So if that does happen, we'll talk about what to do if that does happen. So the first thing to do if you're composting in bear country is to take down bird feeders unless it's the depths of winter. So like mid-December through mid-April, as long as there's snow and it's cold, it's usually fine to feed birds unless it's a warm winter or there's not a lot of snow, or bears have been out and about. But the rest of the year, take those bird feeders down and try and encourage your neighbors to do that also. And what you can do instead is plant native shrubs and herbs and flowers that attract birds and butterflies and other things instead, and also will really add to your local ambiance, to the ambiance of your yard. We also recommend folks compost in some sort of enclosed container. So that could be a store-bought bin, or it could be a homemade bin made from untreated wood or pallets that is lined with wire mesh hardware cloth and has a lid that would be hard for a bear to open. And some of the store-bought bins have open bottoms like this model does. And so we, again, encourage folks to go to the hardware store and get a square of that wire mesh hardware cloth and line the bottom with that, so you don't end up with rodents tunneling up into your bin. You do not need to compost meat and bones if you're composting in a backyard at home. And those meat and bones can go in the trash. The law is written to say if you compost at home, you don't have to compost meat and bones, they can go in the trash, or you can bring them to a drop-off. You could even think about storing them in the freezer, and then when you have a bunch, or you're going to the transfer station or going by the compost site for some other reason, you can bring them to the drop-off. Meat and bones can go into the buckets at transfer stations, and pickups will take meat and bones because those materials are composted in places that are composting so much material that the piles get really hot and they kill all pathogens, and they have their own critter resistant strategies. At home, it's also important to, every time you dump a bucket of those food scraps, to also dump 3 buckets worth of dry plant matter. So that could be, we call those browns. It could be dried leaves, it could be other dried yard stuff. It could be shredded paper, it could be wood chips or wood shavings or sawdust, any of those materials. And those are going to help cap any odors in, and they also help keep the pile light and fluffy, or more fluffy, so that there's air circulating through. And they also are important food for the decomposers, who get a lot of nitrogen from the food scraps, but also need a lot of carbon, which they get from those browns. And then the other piece is to mix up your pile occasionally. Mixing it frequently is great also, so the more hands-on you are, the faster it will decompose. But mix it at least occasionally. And if it's wet, or if you have an odor, add more of those dry browns and mix it up. Get that air in there and get those dry materials to help balance out those wet food scraps. If anybody has a curious bear, we just really don't want to feed it, and we want to give it a negative experience. So if you see a bear, I'm sure you've heard this before, bang on pots and pans, yell, try and get it to go away. And then contact Fish and Wildlife for advice. And they also just track bear and human interactions, so it's really helpful for them, for you to get in touch with them. And then stop composting at home, or use an electric fence around your compost bin, just like you would with honeybees. And if you're doing the electric fence, you should smear some, this is what Fish and Wildlife told us, smear some bacon grease or peanut butter on the fence, so the bear gets curious and gets a little zap to the nose and learns to leave the fence alone. And if you're going to stop composting at home, you can just hold on to your scraps for a little while or freeze them And if the bear doesn't come back and it was a one-time thing, you can start again. But if the bear comes again and again, you're going to want to use a drop-off or get it picked up during that time. And I know some folks who use drop-offs in the spring specifically when bears are waking up and are more active, and then compost at home at other times of the year. And then also remember to talk to your neighbors and see if they have bird feeders up or are feeding pets outside or have some other thing that might be attracting the bear into your neighborhood. Some folks that have more than a handful of households sometimes want to compost all together, and that can work really well. But the thing to know is that because you have more materials, it takes more time and is more of an investment to do it well and have it work well. So if you're interested in doing that, or someone in your community is, I definitely encourage them to talk to the local solid waste district or to get in touch with us so we can help make sure they have all the support they need to do it really well and to have it not become a problem that a town health officer would hear about. And there are a lot of community composting sites throughout Vermont that are working great, and there's a lot of support available there. And some folks will build these much bigger bins, and so the only thing I'll add, just looking at this picture, is that we would still really encourage folks to line that with wire mesh hardware cloth to keep those rodents, curious rodents, out of the pile. I've mentioned these districts a number of times, so I will explain. They are here to help, as are we. Every town in Vermont is part of a solid waste district or alliance or group. Two handfuls of towns are independent, and they have responsibilities to manage certain materials properly and also to help their communities to manage their materials better and to be successful and to be more sustainable. And a lot of the districts have staff that are specifically focused on outreach, who go out and help residents, who train backyard composters, who go out and help businesses. And I would say, even more of them also have folks who can help with logistics, strategizing, and problem solving, whether that's through talking to the local transfer station or whether that's working with the outreach staff who are more familiar with what's in your area. And you can find out which solid waste district or town you're in by going to 802recycles.com and put in your town, and it'll bring you right to the website of your local solid waste entity. And then our team here at DEC is also available to help with folks inquiries and challenges. I think it's great to start with the local contacts because they know more about specific options in a specific area. But that said, we're happy to help too and can help folks figure out if it's really something they need to ask their local person, or if they can't reach their local person, we can help with that. And then I mentioned before, but we'll say again, that vtrecycles.com is full of all sorts of great information about recycling and managing food scraps and the other things that can't go in the trash, and Vermont's free recycling programs and finding a food scrap hauler and much more. And before we get to the Q&A, I'll just answer this question that Meg already sent me, which is whether there are requirements for the landlord or the tenant to pay for those services. And the answer is that no, that is not part of the Rental Housing Health Code, and it can be managed in a variety of different ways. And before we get to the other questions that have come in, I just want to take a moment to thank you all for your work, both as town health officers, but also just as people in Vermont, because Vermont's universal recycling law seems to be working. We've had a couple exciting successes. Well, I already told you about the food donation success, but also last year, Vermonters composted more material at Compost facilities than any other year since we started tracking that. And last year, Vermonters recycled more material than any other year since we started tracking that. So thank you for recycling, thank you for composting, and thank you for being part of the team that's making this happen here in our state. And so with that, we will switch to questions. And we've had some questions come in, and then I will answer some of them, and then I also have answers from Meg that I'll read for some of them. Meg provides the town health officer perspective, Department of Health perspective, and then I sometimes have information I can provide from my perspective. So the first question is, are haulers going to be required to bundle food scraps in addition to trash and recycling at some point in the future? And the answer to that is that no, there's not any requirement to bundle food scraps. It's just trash and recycling, the way the law is written. The next question is, we have a somewhat regional rodent problem in our village center. Our select board and town health board would like to know if the state has any recommendations regarding how to move forward with the universal recycling law without either putting economic pressure on landowners, like mandating another hauling fee service, nor on the town regarding enforcement concerns with backyard compost piles creating more rodent habitat. And I would say for that I'd encourage the town, and maybe with the help of a solid waste district or the materials that we'll send out and provide links for everyone, to really focus on the education piece of composting in enclosed systems in backyards. Even if folks are using an old trash can that they've drilled holes in the side of, or if folks are digging a hole, doing pit composting, or if folks are building bins out of pallets or untreated wood, to use that wire mesh hardware cloth to deter rodents from getting into the system. And something that's really great about backyard composting when it's done well and it's not causing an issue is that if folks are paying for their trash by the bag, if they're going to a transfer station to drop their trash off, they're actually going to save money because they'll have a lot less trash. So that can be pretty exciting and can be part of the educational mission also, is like, you might need to buy the materials to make a bin or to line your pallets with the mesh, but think about the money you will save from your trash. And I would say this really varies widely, but some of the food scrap drop-offs at transfer stations are free or have really low fees. So again, thinking about lowering trash costs through separating food scraps through those systems. Some transfer stations charge a fair bit for it, so it just depends. The next question is about multifamily housing. If a landlord has provided trash, recycling, and compost bins, but unknown tenants are not composting, throwing food scraps in the trash, but we don't know who they are, what does the health officer do if a complaint comes in? So this is an answer from Meg, and then I'll see if I have anything to add. In these circumstances, it would be a good idea to seek voluntary compliance and provide both the tenants and the landlord with educational materials about how to properly separate and store trash, recyclables, and food scraps. The landlord should work with all the tenants to ensure they are aware of the requirements. And under the Rental Housing Health Code, there's obligations on both the property owners and on the tenants. Tenants need to keep the areas they occupy in clean and sanitary conditions, free of trash, recyclables, and food scraps, while property owners are responsible for keeping common areas and other parts of the premises clean and free of trash, recyclables, and food scraps. Yeah, I think that's great that that really is an indicator that there might be a need for some more education and more information and labeling bins. That said, the landlord's not going to be there to watch everybody decide which bin they're putting their banana peel in every time. And so what we would say from our perspective is that the landlord needs to demonstrate that they have a system and that they have a program. Their system has included communicating this information and educating the residents and explaining the expectations. And we have the same response for businesses, is that they need to have a program set up that demonstrates that they've done what they can, basically, and that their program includes staff training. The next question is, how should someone handle complaints where people are doing backyard composting by digging a hole and not installing any type of enclosure? Is this allowed? So this type of backyard composting is allowed, and it's not a problem unless it's causing a public health hazard, for example, by attracting pests or something else. In that case, the town health officer has the authority to seek voluntary compliance and pursue enforcement steps if necessary. And sometimes this is a very effective type of backyard composting, and we actually had a game warden at a presentation who lives in Bear Country tell us that this is what he does at home, and he has not had issues, and it's worked well for him. Someone asked, where can those 5-gallon pails be purchased? So I know a lot of hardware stores sell them, but I also know and want to share the tip that there are free buckets out in the world sometimes. Grocery stores or bakeries or sometimes restaurants get their ingredients in buckets sometimes. Like I've heard sometimes frosting, for example, comes in buckets. And so sometimes they are willing to just give bins away. So it could be worth posting on Front Porch Forum or looking at FreeCycle or just asking your local grocery store or a local big restaurant if they have any ideas before purchasing them. And then it's a great reuse opportunity. So our last question is, what if there are issues with offsite owners and short-term or other tenants that are not following appropriate trash rules, such as Airbnb renters? And this is an answer from Meg, who says that off-site or out-of-state owners of residential rental properties should be treated like any other property owner. So they would be sent a copy of the inspection report detailing any violations of the Rental Housing Health Code, and they would set deadlines for compliance. And then short-term rentals like Airbnbs are not covered by the requirements of the Rental Housing Health Code. But if there is an issue with trash at an Airbnb that is causing a public health hazard, then the town health officer has authority to seek voluntary compliance and pursue enforcement steps if necessary. So that's all our questions for today. Thank you again all for your attention and for your work out there in Vermont, and hope you have a great rest of the day.